Oké, het is bijna 3 uur, dus ik wil weer verder gaan. Ik zie dat Paul Frank gelukkig binnen is. Welcome, Paul. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Adewig.
I will give a short introduction who you are in Dutch, so I hope you don't mind.
Not at all, not at all.
Paul Frank werkt bij de Library of Congress bij de Policy Training and Cooperative Program Division. Hij is daar NACO en SECO Coordinator en Cataloging Policy Specialist, LC BIBFRAME Trainer en BIBFRAME Editor Profile Contact. Velen van ons kennen hem vooral als de enthousiaste begeleider van de NACO-training die we met een aantal UKB-instellingen hebben gevolgd, maar vandaag gaat hij ons meer vertellen over de ontwikkelingen van BIBFRAME en de BIBFRAME Editor. Een kijkje in wat wellicht de toekomst van onze catalogiseerpraktijk wordt. You can start sharing your screen.
Okay, thank you, Adewig. Okay, let's see. Let me pull up my presentation. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Oh, very good. Okay. Thank you all, and I'm very happy to be here, and especially I want to thank Adewig and the organizing group for this presentation. It was a wonderful opportunity for me to meet with some of you again. I'm not sure that all of you know, but 3 years ago, the consortium of Netherlands libraries joined the NACO program, and this was in 2019. And I had the great privilege to work with colleagues in the consortium with NACO training and with the review phase that follows NACO training. And for me, professionally, it was probably the greatest opportunity I had in my career. And I've been working now close to 30 years in this area in library science. But it was extremely rewarding for me because the Program for Cooperative Cataloging is a worldwide organization that is international in scope, but it wasn't until the Netherlands consortium joined NACO that I felt that we truly had international participation. Everyone who attended the training, I have phenomenal respect for because the training was delivered in English, and I understand the difficulties of speaking foreign languages. I studied languages in college, and anyway, I'm not here to talk about that, but it was such a wonderful opportunity to say hello to everyone again and talk to you about BIBFRAME. I also want to thank Maxime for the technical support to get me into this presentation this morning, and I apologize. I jumped in about 1 hour ago just to test things, and I saw my camera and I couldn't turn it off. So I thought, oh, I better leave the meeting so I won't distract anyone. But a very interesting thing happened. The presentation, it was Eric's presentation on RDA, and that gave me an idea about something I would like to talk about a little bit with you today as well, towards the end of our presentation. So I'm here to talk about BIBFRAME and our BIBFRAME editor and what we are doing at the Library of Congress with the BIBFRAME initiative. I couldn't resist. I know that my background, I'm sitting at a cubicle in a pretty mundane office at the Library of Congress, but when I came into work this morning after I got into the building, I noticed the sun was coming up on the Thomas Jefferson building. This is our main library building. And I couldn't resist taking this picture, but I couldn't adjust the blinds, the in front of it, so it looks sort of like maybe an Art Deco photograph. But it was a wonderful inspiration to me to see the sun coming up on our main building. And if you ever have the opportunity to visit Washington, D.C., please let me know. I would love to show you the Jefferson Building and arrange for a tour. It's a fantastic building, and I'm very proud of it. But for today's presentation, I want to look at 6 different topics that we are addressing in our BIBFRAME pilot. But to be honest with you, 3 of the topics are really not that interesting, so I don't want to spend too much time on those. And the first one actually is one that I don't think is extremely interesting. So I will cover it in very light detail, but you have access to the slides if you want to find out more. I think we all know what BIBFRAME is, so I won't spend too much time on that. But what I really want to spend time on is this, the BIBFRAME tools, BIBFRAME and Mark, and Marva, our BIBFRAME editor, and the BIBFRAME database. So of these 6 topics, only 3 of them, and I'd like to try to give a live demo of Marva towards the end. And I think that's what would be the most interesting to everyone. But let me go quickly through the goals. And by the way, well, I don't speak Dutch, and I tried understanding a little bit, but I'm not doing too well. So please, if you have questions, depending on how the organizers would like to cover them, I would be happy at any time to try to answer questions as we go along. The Library of Congress is a federal agency, and this is perhaps a very American way of running corporate structures. I think in America, we tend to be very bureaucratic in the way we run federal programs and federal agencies. So in order to make BIBFRAME, even just to test BIBFRAME and to experiment with BIBFRAME, there need to be many offices involved, and every office has their own specific goals for the endeavor. And that's exactly what happened with BIBFRAME at the Library of Congress. You see many different offices here, a vision statement, a mission statement. These are all prerequisites to actually trying something out. And they go back quite a ways. We started working in BIBFRAME as early as 2014, so 7 years ago, and we still are in the stage of a pilot. I think this slide might be of interest to all of you. Our vision, I'm not saying this is a reality yet, but our vision is that all Library of Congress catalogers will be creating metadata in BIBFRAME by the end of this year, 2022. That's a big vision, and we have a lot to do to get to that point, but we recognize here that linked data is the future for libraries, and we must implement linked data techniques and move away from our traditional MARC-based descriptions. And as we move forward, we cannot let go of MARC. MARC is going to be around for a long time. We can't just stop MARC and move to linked data. So we are presented with a very unusual situation with dealing with metadata in 2 different standards, in MARC and in RDF or in BIBFRAME. So we have to reconcile those 2 standards and recognize that they need to coexist for the near term. We hope that our BIBFRAME pilot at the Library of Congress will serve as a model to others in the profession moving into linked data. And I will admit right now that Europe has gone much farther in this than we have in the United States. I have attended many BIBFRAME European conferences. I know that there are many national libraries that have already implemented a BIBFRAME framework, and they are ahead of us. But for us in the United States, we're setting a standard for other agencies within the United States to use BIBFRAME as a data model. Now, maybe now is a good time for me to speed up a little bit on these slides, but you can see many other goals that we have. In the office where I work, my responsibility is training. So that comes under, let's see, I'm going to speed through this. I want to get to my part here. I'm going to go back in a second. So my personal involvement in BIBFRAME here at the Library of Congress is to provide training and training documentation. So this manual that I will show you, I think I'll wait towards the end when I do the demo to show you the manual. I am working on this every day and adding to it and improving it. This is the user manual that everyone in the BIBFRAME pilot at the Library of Congress is using. I also develop training materials as new features are changed or released, and I'm responsible for increasing the participant pool with an understanding that our vision is that by the end of this year, 2022, we will have all catalogers working in BIBFRAME. Now, that's not to say that BIBFRAME will be our database of entry, our official database, but we want to increase understanding of BIBFRAME across all of the catalogers at the Library of Congress. So coming to this from a training standpoint is really why I'm here today, to talk to you about the training aspect. But I can't underestimate the goals that our network development office has set. Now, the network development, NDMSO, means Network Development and MARC Standards Office. That's an office at the Library of Congress, and actually the technical side of BIBFRAME is in this office, NDMSO. In NDMSO, they are moving all of their systems from our local servers to cloud-based. They are reconverting all of our data files, and this means, for the most part, MARC data files into BIBFRAME, into linked data using improved algorithms. They are working on issues with non-Latin scripts, which I will talk about when we get to the demonstration, and how we are looking at BIBFRAME as a means to simplify MARC, because those two are still related. As I said, we cannot separate BIBFRAME from MARC. And they are working on different conversions that I will show you at the end as well. How to convert a MARC description to a BIBFRAME description, and vice versa. How to convert a BIBFRAME description back to MARC. And in the network development office, they are the responsible office for the editor that I will demonstrate a little bit later. We are involved with outside libraries, and when I mentioned that in Europe, I know several national libraries have moved to BIBFRAME. I know that the Swedish National Library has moved, and I also know that the National Library of Hungary is using a folio version of BIBFRAME to describe their resources, and we are reaching out as a national. Did you know, actually, technically, the Library of Congress is not officially the National Library of the United States. We are the Library of Congress, of our legislative body, but we are considered one of three national libraries in the United States: Library of Congress, National Library of Medicine, and the National Agricultural Library. So we are not officially the National Library, but we are considered de facto the National Library. And in that role, we are working with outside libraries and outside institutions to improve or to move forward with our BIBFRAME project. Okay, now I'm going to move into another topic now. That was probably more detail than you might have wanted about the bureaucracy of running a pilot in the United States, but that's the way it is. But now let's get into the details. BIBFRAME is not an integrated library system. BIBFRAME is only a set of tools that can be used by an integrated library system to generate and to display RDF data or any other serialization that's a linked data serialization of bibliographic data. I believe that often the average user does not understand this. And I was guilty of this myself when we first started the BIBFRAME pilot. I thought, oh, BIBFRAME will replace our ILS, our integrated library system, but I was totally wrong. All BIBFRAME is a series of tools that can be ingested and implemented by an integrated library system to reflect bibliographic descriptions in RDF. So I think that's an important thing to remember. So we are not developing a BIBFRAME ILS, we are developing BIBFRAME tools here. The tools, the main tools, we have our MARVA, which I will demonstrate. That's our input tool. The BIBFRAME database, which is our back end. We call it a back end, sort of a non-public user version of all of our linked data descriptions. And then the tools to convert MARC to BIBFRAME. That's one of the tools. And a newer tool that just came out last year is the companion BIBFRAME to MARC comparison tool. And I'll show you that as well towards the end. If I'm not sure all of you will relate to this, but I know that the participants from the UKB consortium will know exactly what I'm talking about when I go into MARC. MARC uses strings to identify things, not links, not URIs, only labels or strings. And if we look at a MARC record, I think you will understand a little bit better what I am trying to get at here. BIBFRAME relies heavily on relationships, and not only relationships, because we could say, for example, when Eric gave the RDA presentation, RDA is all about relationships, but BIBFRAME is about relationships that depend on actionable URIs, uniform resource identifiers, to identify the relationships in a linked data way. If you look at a MARC record here, it's flat. You can see relationships here, but how are they identified? Only through strings of data. There is nothing in this MARC description that I can click on or go to an external source to understand the inherent relationships. In MARC, the relationships are all done through the MARC tags, the MARC indicators, and the strings of data that are contained in those textual fields. MARC has served us extremely well for years, and it's a very powerful communication format, but it does not work well on the web. It's not linked data friendly. The only way to find this information in a linked data server or on the web is to first go to the OPAC for an institution and then search directly in the OPAC. So it's buried. This information is buried. It's wonderful information, but it's buried. It's not accessible on the web. Also, MARC data is redundant And this is because it has built up over time. It's added to, it's refined, it's corrected, it's not an organized method. It's like adding bits and pieces like this. So it's turned into something that's really more than it was intended to be when it started. So for example, in the fixed field area of a MARC record, you see data that's repeated in the textual part of the description. It's redundant. And I said it already, but I feel very strongly about this. The MARC records that we describe today are sort of a victim of MARC's history. We end up repeating information in different ways. And actually, I will admit, for sometimes unknown reasons. You know, there could be a library that uses, for example, a library may use this type of data in searches or in organization of files, but not everyone does. So we're coding data that not everyone is going to be using. So it's somewhat time consuming as well as redundant. Now, when we started looking at MARC data and thinking about BibFrame and linked data, we decided that there needed to be areas where we could reduce the redundancy. Why do we need to carry this duplication into the future? You say it once and you're done. You don't need to say it in more than one way. So we have in our conversion programs from MARC to BibFrame, dropped indicators and codes that were no longer relevant, converted codes and data strings like names to URIs, because now we, instead of a string of things, we have a URI, an actionable link, instead of the string. We've differentiated statements and split data into parts with that emphasis on relationships. Now, all of this is to say that the MARC record of the future, because we're not going to be able to leave MARC will be around, is going to look much different. And the reason the MARC data, at least in the United States, will look much different is because of the influence of BibFrame and linked data. Now, the latest tool that we have made available to the public is a reverse conversion from BibFrame back to MARC. And it's in this conversion that you will see how different a MARC description will look in the future. In the BibFrame to MARC, we do not use ISBD punctuation, except if we need to transcribe a statement that includes more than one relationship, and I think I can demonstrate that in a second. We've added URIs to our MARC descriptions to make it much more linked data friendly. And we are dealing with an unusual way of doing non-Latin scripts. And this has to do because of the mandate of the Library of Congress. So in many countries, a national library has a mandate to collect publications from within that country. That's their primary mandate. But because the Library of Congress is a is a library of Congress, and Congress needs access to materials in all languages, our collection policy is to collect worldwide materials. And many of those materials are in non-Latin scripts. And we have traditionally used romanization schemes to make non-Latin scripts understandable in Latin letters. But in our BibFrame pilot, we have decided to experiment, and we are only using Latin script for access points in a BibFrame description. For transcribed data from a resource, we are using the original script of the resource. So that's a new experiment for us in BibFrame. In our pilot right now, we have the unfortunate situation where catalogers in the BibFrame pilot need to describe resources in two systems, in two standards, one in BibFrame and one in MARC. And that's because MARC is still our standard of record. We use MARC records to fully reflect the holdings of the Library of Congress. If we get to the day when BibFrame becomes the standard, then we will no longer need to create MARC records manually. We will allow the BibFrame description to convert to a MARC description that we need to use for sharing with other libraries. That's one of our mandates too, to share our data throughout the United States. So we understand that institutions will need either MARC descriptions or BibFrame descriptions. So we need to account for both of those. I was overly optimistic when the BibFrame pilot began in 2015. So 7 years ago, we started our BibFrame pilot. And I thought, oh, MARC will only be around for maybe 3 or 4 more years. But I've learned, I've gotten wiser, and I realized that MARC will be around for a much longer time than I originally thought. So we need to continue to have a data flow from MARC to BibFrame and BibFrame back to MARC. Now this part I definitely am not going to talk about because this just describes the history of our pilots, but I will repeat that our pilot began officially in 2015. So we're approaching the 7-year mark of our pilot, and we're increasing participation. You can read it on the slides on your own, but we are up to 150 participants now, Library of Congress catalogers working in BibFrame, and we hope that by the end of this year, we will double that number so that we have all catalogers. We have 300 cataloging staff at the Library of Congress, 300 individual catalogers. We hope to have all of them at least familiar with BibFrame, not necessarily using it exclusively, but understanding how it works. Okay, well, let's get to let's do a demo. I wanted to show you what we are doing here. Now, this is Marva. This is our BibFrame editing tools. So let me pull Marva up. And show it to you here. And actually, I should probably yeah, I don't see any questions or anything. Very good. Okay. You might wonder, this is new. How did we get this name, Marva? What do you think this means? Well, we had a contest for all of the participants in our BibFrame pilot. Our network development and MARC standards office released this version of the editor last June of 2021. And we called it the BibFrame editor, which is very generic, very plain. And we thought, let's give it a name. And so we ran a contest and we had participants submit names for consideration. And you might know, maybe this will help. Maybe some of you remember Henriette Avram, who was a cataloger at, I'm sorry, she was not a cataloger. She was a systems analyst at the Library of Congress, but she is credited with developing the MARC format back in the 1960s. So some of our BibFrame pilot catalogers came up with a wonderful idea to recognize Henriette Avram's contribution to cataloging by naming the editor after her, but in spelling her name in reverse, A-V-R-A-M. So it's like looking to the future, a reflection of the past, but looking to the future. So I thought it was quite a good name, and we just adopted it last year. Okay, so when a Library of Congress cataloger, BIBFRAME cataloger, logs in to Marva, this is what they see. A save file, a local save file of all of the work that they've done. This is only the work, these are only the descriptions that I have worked on. My username, pfrank here, sorted by date. And I can get a lot of information here, but all this is a local save file. This is not a production database right here. If I go to everyone's records, I'm going to get a view of everyone in the BIBFRAME pilot, of everything they've done. So it takes a while to load this view. This is helpful if I'm looking, especially for me as a trainer. For example, just last week, we had a 5-day training workshop in BIBFRAME. And a lot of the work that you see here are from people who were in that training last week. So I'm going to need to go through and review the work that they did so I can access it here. But this is also only a save file. This is not the official version of the data. This is our working file here. Ideally, what a cataloger would do, and in a perfect world, we all want to start with an original description. We want to do the whole thing from top to bottom. And we can do that in Marva by clicking on Create New Record, and then you can select the monograph type, select the profile type based on the format that you're dealing with. And generally, monograph is the default. And then I have an input screen where I can describe the resource. But if I go to in more likely, I mean, it's only in an idealistic world that every description that you create is original. We are always working with existing descriptions and either enhancing them or editing them in some other way. So what I'm going to do is go to load existing records, and you see right here that there is a link. Now this link, BFDB, goes directly to the BIBFRAME database. BFDB means BIBFRAME database. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm taken to another tool. Now I'm no longer in the editor. I'm no longer in Marva. I've gone to the BIBFRAME database. And this is our cataloging module for BIBFRAME, for catalogers in the pilot. It has some wonderful search options here, which are keywords, relevance keyword ranked. But for catalogers, most of us as catalogers prefer left anchor browsing because we're used to looking for known things, names, agents, places, subjects, all left anchored strings. So I tend to use this area much more. But for the purposes of our demo today, I'm going to search on an identifier for a resource. And it is something that I think is very relevant since compared to Eric's presentation a little bit earlier. This is our local identifier that we use. It's LCCN, Library of Congress Control Number. And I have chosen the Introducing RDA, a guide to the basics after 3R. Now, you see two BIBFRAME instances. You do not see any works. You do not see any items. You do not see any hubs. I'll talk about hubs in just a second. This is because the identifier, the Library of Congress identifier, is tied directly to the instance. Identifiers are recorded in instance descriptions. Now, why do you see two here? Well, this resource, Introducing RDA, was written by Chris Oliver, who is quite well known for her work with RDA and now with the LRM and the official RDA. This is her first resource, Introducing RDA, based on original RDA. This is Chris Oliver's second resource, which implements the LRM model, the library reference model. So I want to click on this one. This is the more recent one, and show you how the description is reflected in the BIBFRAME database. This is the instance. We have all of the instance properties in BIBFRAME here. I could go to the work representing this instance by clicking here, instance of, and I'm taken to the work description of this resource. All of the work properties that are defined in either RDA or in BIBFRAME. And then I can go back to the instance again. Let's see, that's the online version. So let's go back to, let's go to this one. Oh, did it again, hold on. Okay, well, this will be okay when we pull it into the BIBFRAME data into Marva. Now, and actually, I'm glad that happened. I got a little bit of a bug there when I clicked on that, but this is part of what we expect BIBFRAME pilot participants to help us with. You know, things change all the time, and you fix one thing and something else breaks, and so we often are reporting errors like this to the Network Development Office. But the question I want to talk about is, how did this description, this work, and this instance end up in the BIBFRAME database? This existed already. A cataloger has not worked with this at all. And if you go to our MARC database, here is the same description. This MARC description was converted to BIBFRAME and loaded into the BIBFRAME database. So that's how I was able to access it, by clicking on when I was in the BIBFRAME database and I loaded the existing record, I was able to pull in that MARC description. But let's say that we want to edit this description. Right now, we can't do anything when it's in the BIBFRAME database. What we need to do is go to the instance again, and then we can pull it into Marva by clicking on this editor link. And this will start the process of the data flow from the BIBFRAME database into Marva, but I need to select a template. Which profile fits this data? Well, it's a monograph. So I'm going to select monograph, and then the data will show up in Marva. And now I can edit it. This is the editing area of BIBFRAME. So you can see that there are some areas, and primarily most areas, are using controlled vocabulary. So here is our creator, Chris Oliver. If I click on or hover over this check mark, it says heading is valid. This is a valid NACO authority record, authorized access point. But look at what happened here. This says uncontrolled under MARC relator term. Why would that happen? Well, it's because when the data was brought over from MARC into the BIBFRAME database, it was unsure whether this was an RDA relationship designator or a MARC relator term. So what I need to do here is verify and select author. And you can see now this is a drop-down list. So we're getting actionable URIs for each of these. So now I can select it, and it's controlled. It's correct. Now, another thing I want to show you, let me show you how the lookup works. So if I say, okay, let's take Chris Oliver out. I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to start over. So let's start keying in left anchored, Chris Oliver's name. So you see that we've shifted to another input screen. The lookup here is going against the name authority file, the NACO file that some of you work in every day. So we're not sure which Oliver Chris we want, But if I click on one, then I see a description of the person on the right-hand screen. And if I'm still not sure, I can go ahead and click on view on id.loc.gov. Now, this is our linked data server that's publicly available, and we have all NACO records in this linked data service. And I can see that, yes, this is the Chris Oliver that I'm looking for. So I can select that name here, and it will put it into the BibFrame description. Now, I want to show you something else that we're experimenting with in Wikidata, and this is only within the BibFrame pilot. So let's take Chris Oliver off again and go to, let's put her name in direct order. Of course, if it's looking against the name authority file, we're not going to find anything, because in the name authority file, we invert surnames and put them in the initial position and follow with the forename. But if you're familiar with Wikidata, Wikidata does not do that. Wikidata does direct order usage. So I can toggle here to Wikidata and find Chris Oliver's name within Wikidata. And we're allowing BibFrame pilot participants to use Wikidata equally with the name authority file, which we don't do in our MARC descriptions. So if I want to check to see that this is the correct Chris Oliver, and see, these are all, these are not disambiguated. Wikidata doesn't worry about disambiguation like we do in NACO. So we're in a whole different identity management system here when we're looking at, here is probably the one, Canadian Librarian and Cataloger. And if I want to verify, I can go right to the Wikidata item and verify that, yes, this is the Chris Oliver who wrote the resource that we are cataloging. So let's go ahead and select her for this. We're going to use the Wikidata description here. Now, I realize my time's running a little bit short, and I want to show you some tools that I can share with you to play around with on your own. But the only other area I wanted to talk about quickly was the subjects, because, and I feel very strongly about this as a somewhat old cataloger. I've been cataloging for 30 years, and we at the Library of Congress have always used Library of Congress subject headings as our primary subject content vocabulary. And Library of Congress subject headings works under the principle of using free-floating subdivisions. So for example, you create strings of data with multiple elements, and that string means something depending on the order and the type of elements within it. But those strings are not under authority control. There is not a URI that you can associate with them. They are simply strings of textual data that mean something within LCSH. So what we've had to do in BibFrame, which sort of violates many of the principles of linked data, but we need to do it in order to allow cataloging to continue as we would do it in MARC, is to make a system that will allow us to build strings in LCSH. So for example, let's say resource description and access is our cataloging code. That happens to be a name authority heading for a work. So I can select it here and make it a topic of my resource. But now let's say I have a subdivision. Let's say periodicals. Let's say we have a periodical about RDA. I have to search the subdivision separately, and I'm presented with three options here. Why would there be three options for periodicals? Well, one periodicals is a topic. One is a topical subdivision, and one is a form subdivision. So I have to be sure to pick the correct one that I want, and in this case, this is the form subdivision, and then I have to identify it as a genre and add it that way. So we have found that for our BIBFRAME pilot participants, this is the hardest area to work in Marva because of this old way of creating these strings of subjects. My wish, this personally speaking, is that from a linked data standpoint, using fast vocabulary or some other subject vocabulary for which there is an actionable URI for every element will be much better for the future. So we're hoping to implement fast in our BibFrame descriptions to speed up the time that it takes to create these strings and eliminate creating the strings. Okay, I'm aware of the time, and this was just a small demo, but I want to show you some tools, and I'm happy to share them with you after the session in case you're interested. I mentioned the manual that I'm creating for Marva. It's a I use the LibGuide format. I'm not sure what LibGuides, probably library guides format, but you can see the types of topics that are covered in training and what we need to share with our BibFrame pilot participants. So all of the pilot participants refer to this manual as the primary document for working in BibFrame, and I'm constantly updating it. Another tool that I mentioned was the Mark to BibFrame comparison viewer. This is freely available on our BibFrame site, and you can key in an LCCN and see the serialization in RDF XML, which I generally prefer to see for BibFrame, but also in Turtle, and you can compare descriptions that way. Here is our, let's see, our newest tool is the BibFrame to Mark tool, and you can find information about that right here as well on our Library of Congress BibFrame website. And I think that is it. And I know that everyone is going to ask, can they play around with Marva? And I checked with our colleagues in the Network Development Office, and they said, unfortunately, they don't have a version for external use yet, but it's coming up very soon. So I will make a note to share it with Ottawa and the planners of this meeting, and hopefully they can share it with you all. These were some things I wanted to talk about. I touched on them a little bit, but I knew that I wouldn't have enough time to go into great detail. But maybe another time, or please email me if you have some questions that I wasn't able to answer. And here's my closing. I did my best to do it in Dutch. I don't know if this is right or not, but I wanted to thank you all. And especially I wanted to thank those of you who were in the NACO training 3 years ago and tell you how proud I am and how happy I am to work with all of you. Okay, Ottawa, I hope there were some questions as I went along.
I think Anneke is going to take them.
Okay, Annika.
Excuse me. Good afternoon, Paul. Thank you very much for that splendid presentation. We have one question from Erik van Balken. Do you at the Library of Congress use work expression URIs created at other national libraries, for instance, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, or do you create work URIs yourselves in case of cataloging foreign publications?
We create our own, and that makes me realize there was one topic that I think is extremely important to talk about. So our data has developed in the United States in a very unusual way over the years. We have traditionally created bibliographic descriptions for resources, but then we have used the authority format to create works and under RDA expressions. So that difference has been quite a difficulty for us in BibFrame because we've had to reconcile the bibliographic data and the authority data, which would be primarily the file in which expressions reside. So what we have done in our pilot is convert all titles and name titles from the authority format into BibFrame hubs. We call them hubs. If you look at BibFrame experimentation in other countries, they call them opus, or they call them works or super works. But these authority data represent a high level work or expression description. And our catalogers then pull them in to Marva as a work hub, not as an authority record. So we are hoping, and this is something that you'll be hearing about soon if you follow the types of developments at the Library of Congress. We are going to start creating work descriptions as bibliographic entities, not as authority entities. The bibliographic format in MARC has all the data elements that you need to describe a work. Why go to the authority file to do that when the MARC format can accommodate it? So that is an experiment we're going to be doing in order to make BibFrame conversion work better for us. And you will be hearing more about it as we go ahead. But to answer the question in a much shorter way, we do not make use of external data, for example, from BNF. We just we create and mint our own works and expressions locally.
Thank you for that answer. The next question is from Julia Kamendi, and could you show us an example of how BibFrame treats serial publications?
Oh, that's a really good question. Okay, well, maybe I can describe it before I show it to you. In the United States, we've hit against a very unfortunate history. We have a program called CONSER, which is cooperative of online serials, and for years the work of CONSER catalogers has been done in OCLC. And I remember from the training that I did with colleagues in the UKB consortium in 2019, those of you who have worked with serials are aware of the CONSER database, which is purely a MARC-based database. So our catalogers at the Library of Congress who are in the BibFrame pilot and are working with serials find that their work in BibFrame is extremely limited because they really need to work in that master database of CONSER in OCLC. And we have not been able to find a way to synchronize data coming from OCLC CONSER into BibFrame. So of all of our groups, and I can show you that we do have in Marva the option to create a serial right here. We have a profile for serials that has all of the data elements that either RDA or BibFrame would require for a serial description. This data only can reside in the BibFrame database. It does not transfer over to OCLC CONSER. So it sort of opens the question more, because another area that we are working on is using Marva or the BibFrame database to import external descriptions, not just serials, but for example, copy cataloging. And right now we have a very roundabout way to do that. You can import the description into our MARC database and then wait for it to sync over to the data flows into the BIBFRAME database, and then you pull it up. So that's a very convoluted and unfortunate workflow that I'm hoping will not be around for a long, long time. But again, to answer the question much more succinctly, our serials catalogers still do all of their work in concert and using MARC only, and just they advise us as in the BIBFRAME initiative on the data elements that we need to have in the profiles for serials.
Thank you. The next question is from Eric from Balcom again. How do you see the process of fading away of MARC?
Well, for us, it's a very, it will not be a slow, it will not be a fast demise, because one of our mandates is to allow, to provide bibliographic data to all libraries in the United States. And many of those libraries are years away from being able to accommodate linked data. They still, their primary access is through MARC. So although I hope that Library of Congress catalogers will very soon only be describing resources in BibFrame and allowing the tools that we have to convert BibFrame data to MARC data to continue to function, that MARC data will still be around for a long, long time. And another thing, it just occurred to me to answer Eric's question, is that for all of our acquisitions processes and inventory management, there are the data that we use for inventory management, holdings, records, item records, in many cases are not even in the MARC standard. We just have data that we use controlled terms for that are only used locally. So we've come to the realization that for inventory and acquisitions processes, we still will need to work in our MARC-based systems for the long term. So we're thinking of BibFrame as only being a discovery layer, but the actual behind the scenes standard would continue to be MARC. So MARC will be around for quite a long time.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, we're sort of nearing the end of the meeting, so I don't see any new questions. I think it was a lot of information.
Yeah, could I show one more thing quickly, since we have just a couple minutes? And Eric, because of Eric's presentation, this is the idea that occurred to me. So today, look at the date. Today is our deadline this afternoon for completing the metadata guidance documentation for RDA, for official RDA. And I know that Eric was talking about musical works and expressions, and I wanted to show you an example of how the Library of Congress and the PCC will be using the official RDA to describe resources. And you might think this is not relevant, but here we give instructions on using MARC for this element in RDA, medium of performance of musical content of representative expression. But we also are giving examples in the BibFrame ontology. So this is our hope, that catalogers will start using the BibFrame ontology throughout the PCC, because we have started to use it here at the Library of Congress. So you'll be seeing all of these documents on our RDA site very soon. But I couldn't resist, since Eric talked about official RDA and that the coincidence of having today be our deadline, that I wanted you to see that. So sorry for that distraction.
No, that's okay. And I see Eric is already in contact with Nancy Lorimer on the performance music ontology.
Yeah, Nancy's the right person. Yeah, Nancy's been working very heavily with us on the medium of performance as well.
Okay, so thank you very much for your time. I'm going to do a little closing for today. In Dutch, I hope you don't mind.
Oh, no, of course. I hope you don't mind if I stay around for that. I'd like to just hear the end.
Yes, please. Ik wil graag iedereen bedanken voor het deelnemen aan deze studiemiddag. Ik hoop dat het voor iedereen leerzaam was. Ik vond het in ieder geval erg leerzaam. Ik denk dat deze middag iets heeft laten zien dat metadata namelijk veel meer is dan een beschrijving van een item in de catalogus. We maken metadata vooral met dat doel, maar met goed gestructureerde metadata kunnen we zoveel meer doen en het is belangrijk dat te onthouden bij de creatie ervan. Daarnaast laat het zien dat we de metadata ook moeten onderhouden. We moeten zorgen dat ze maximaal herbruikbaar zijn, maar we moeten ook dat op een verantwoorde manier doen. Rekening houdend met een veranderende visie en vooral rekening houdend met al onze gebruikers van de data. Ik deel deze afbeeldingen uit Wikidata als het bedankslide. Momenteel volg ik met een aantal collega's een Wikidata training. En Wikidata is de linked data tak van Wikimedia, waar men door linked data items mee wil werken aan een inclusievere wereld. Alles wat notable is, kan er worden beschreven door middel van linked data. Behalve voor Wikipedia worden deze data ook door de grote zoekmachines en spraakassistenten gebruikt. Ook bibliotheken en culturele instellingen leveren een bijdrage aan Wikidata en misschien is het een leuk onderwerp voor een volgende bijeenkomst. Ik wil in het bijzonder nogmaals de sprekers bedanken, Erik van Balkum, Sanne van Splinter en Paul Frank. Dank jullie wel voor jullie leerzame presentaties. To make sure Paul understands, I would like to thank our presenters for their valuable contributions. En daarmee besluit ik deze bijeenkomst.